When I returned home after graduating with honors from university, my life became a series of Sundays filled with uncomfortable silences and gazes that avoided meeting mine. My family, who once celebrated my small academic achievements, now seemed ashamed of me. It didn't matter that I had completed my studies with excellence. All they saw was that my path didn't fit into the mold of success they were so eager to display. Each dinner followed the same script. Dad, barely sitting down at the table, would fire the question that had become a ritual. When are you going to get a real job? He wouldn't even look me in the eyes when saying it. It was as if my mere presence in the house was an uncomfortable reminder of a failure that to them was as evident as it was shameful. Your cousin was just promoted to junior partner at his law firm, Dad would say with pride. Your sister is dating a finance guy and you're still playing at building your business. He said it with that mocking tone he reserved for childish things, as if I were a child trapped in an office game. I clearly remember the day I got my first real contract, $500 for redesigning a local bakery's website. I ran down the stairs, my laptop in hand, my heart about to burst from my chest. Dad, Mom, look, I announced with a smile that barely fit on my face. I just signed with my first paying client. I slid the laptop across the table, hoping to see in their eyes the pride I had sought so many times. Dad barely glanced at the screen before changing the subject. That's nice, honey. Did you know your cousin Mark just bought a new BMW? 28 years old and already driving a luxury car. He handed me back the laptop without even reading what I was showing him. Mom, on the other hand, didn't even pretend to be interested. She quickly changed the subject. Jennifer, tell us more about Alex, that boy you're dating. Isn't his father running an investment firm? I stood there with my laptop in my hands, watching my achievement evaporate before their eyes as if it had never existed. That night, I worked until 3 a.m., finishing the project while the house slept in a silence that was heavier than any word of contempt. Over time, I learned to separate my work life from my family life. I used my middle name professionally, as if I could protect something of myself that way. My company was growing, but at home I remained invisible. It wasn't humility that kept me quiet. It was pure exhaustion. Trying to prove your worth to those who have already decided you're worthless is like carrying a dead weight on your shoulders. It wears you down, drains you, consumes you. My sister Jennifer had started dating Alex 8 months ago, a young man in expensive suits with a perfect smile, the living stereotype of success. Alex is taking me to the beach next month, she would announce at every dinner, then giving me a look loaded with superiority. Maybe someday you too can take someone on vacation. Each of her words was a small stab. Each comparison, another cut in a wound I no longer knew how to close. I remember once during a family barbecue, I stepped aside for a moment to handle an emergency with a server. 10 minutes on the phone. Saved hours of work for my clients. But when I returned, my uncle greeted me with a mocking smile. Finished playing video games? Everyone laughed. No one asked what I was actually doing. No one wanted to know. Over time, they even started excluding me from important family gatherings, which Alex already frequented. The explanation was simple and cruel. We don't want you to ruin the atmosphere, they said. My own family preferred to erase me to impress a stranger they barely knew. I still keep the message I received before my cousin's wedding. We only have room for 4 at our table. Alex is coming with Jennifer, maybe next time. I read it over and over, feeling a part of me breaking a little more. I had turned down a trip with a childhood friend that same weekend to accompany them. Instead, I spent the night alone watching their happiness without me on Instagram. That night, something changed inside me. Something cold and sharp hardened. When Thanksgiving Day came, they couldn't uninvite me without raising suspicions. But they warned me. Please don't talk about your little online thing, Mom told me over the phone, her voice full of nervousness. Alex will bring his parents. They're very successful people. Mom didn't know that my little online thing already employed more than 40 people. She didn't know we had just closed an important investment round. She didn't know that I, the uncomfortable son, had built something they never bothered to ask about. That morning, I closed the last-minute flights tab I had opened on my laptop and decided to attend. Not for them, for me. What they didn't know was that the real Thanksgiving surprise was already sitting at their own table. Thanksgiving Day dawned cold under a gray sky that seemed to foretell what was to come. I put on the best clothes I had, a simple, well-ironed shirt, dress pants I rarely wore, and polished shoes that had seen better days. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving, not to adjust my appearance, but to remind myself who I was. I wasn't the failure they saw. I wasn't the uncomfortable relative they preferred to hide. I was a man who had built something real with his own hands, even if they didn't know it yet. The journey to the family house felt endless. Each traffic light, each corner was an opportunity to turn around and abandon everything. But I didn't. Every memory of contempt, of invisibility, of minimization burned within me, fueling a spark of dignity that refused to go out. When I arrived, the luxury cars were already parked in front of the house. My cousin's brand new BMW, an uncle's shiny Mercedes, and now Alex's gleaming Audi. Each of those cars was a silent reminder of what my family considered success. I entered the house and, as always, felt the fleeting glances, the forced greetings, the tense smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Mom greeted me at the door with a tight smile. Her eyes quickly scanned me, looking for flaws, looking for something to be ashamed of. "Good that you came," she said. But her tone was more of a warning than a welcome. I hung my coat in silence, swallowing the urge to say something. The aroma of roast turkey filled the house, mixing with expensive perfumes and contained anxiety. The room was meticulously decorated. Golden centerpieces, scented candles, elaborately folded napkins, everything arranged to impress Alex's parents. And there he was, standing next to Jennifer, laughing as if he had belonged to our family forever. Tall, tanned, impeccably dressed. He looked like he was taken from a magazine cover. Jennifer looked dazzling beside him, wrapped in an elegant dress. The perfect symbol of the ideal daughter, the fulfilled promise. When they saw me, Alex raised a hand in a casual greeting. Nothing to betray what was about to happen. I responded with a slight nod, preferring to stay on the sidelines, invisible, as they preferred. Dinner began as expected. Toasts to the family, to new achievements, to the blessings of the year. Each word was a needle that stuck under my skin. When Dad made an especially long toast about the importance of building successful careers that made parents proud, I saw how he deliberately avoided looking at me. Jennifer took the opportunity to talk about Alex, his travels, their wedding plans, the family investments. Everyone listened, captivated, as if her voice confirmed everything they wanted to believe. I ate in silence, counting the minutes for it all to end, until fate decided to intervene at some point. Alex got up to go to the kitchen to get more dessert plates. Moved more by the need to escape the atmosphere than by courtesy, I offered to help him. While we were looking in the drawers, Alex looked at me out of the corner of his eye and smiled in a conspiratorial way. "Hey, boss," he said quietly. "How's the team?" For a second, I thought I had misheard. I froze with a plate half pulled out. "What?" I asked, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. Alex let out a light laugh, like someone revealing a funny secret. "The team, man. Aren't you going to introduce me properly?" He shrugged. "I've been using your company to manage my online images for almost 2 years. When I found out who you were, I thought it was funny. I understood you preferred to keep things separate. I respect that, but I always thought it was weird that your family wasn't proud of you." The world seemed to wobble beneath my feet. Alex was a client of my company, and not just any client. He was one of those who had driven our growth the most in the last year. I had never known because, like most of our users, his identity was protected by privacy protocols. We returned to the table. I carried a secret weighing in my pockets, a burden I didn't know how to carry. Alex, however, seemed determined to bring it to light. When dessert arrived and the toasts resumed their course, it happened. Alex stood up, raised his glass, and with a smile said, "I propose a special toast." Everyone looked at him expectantly. "To the man who has made much of my success possible this year, not only on a personal level, but professionally. A guy who deserves much more recognition than he has received tonight." "A round of applause for my boss," he shouted, pointing directly at me. The entire room fell into a leaden silence. The silence that followed Alex's toast was thick, almost solid. I could feel every gaze fixed on me, as if I were suddenly a completely new figure before them. My parents' faces froze. Horror, disbelief, and something deeper, a barely disguised fear. Jennifer dropped her glass, spilling wine on the white tablecloth. My aunt coughed uncomfortably, and my cousin sat with a piece of turkey half chewed in his mouth. I remained still, hands on my lap, as if containing myself was the only way not to bring down the entire scene with a single blow. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to justify myself. The truth, after years of imposed silences, revealed itself alone, luminous, impossible to ignore. Alex, completely ignoring the tension or perhaps enjoying it, continued cheerfully. "Yes, I've not only been using his services for years," he said, I've also recommended his company to many of my colleagues. He's brilliant, visionary, a true leader, and you have the privilege of calling him family. An uncomfortable murmur ran around the table. Mom was the first to try to regain some control. She cleared her throat awkwardly and forced a smile. Well, we didn't know you two knew each other so well. Alex let out a sincere laugh. Know him? If it weren't for his company, I wouldn't have gotten the promotion you're celebrating today. He lowered his voice, as if sharing a secret. Some of my partners are also his clients. Believe me, ma'am, your son is someone very important. I saw how Mom paled. Dad, who always showed so much pride talking about others' achievements, now seemed not to know where to look. My uncles, previously so condescending, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging furtive glances, and Jennifer trembled with contained rage. Her hands twisted the napkin, her lips pressed together, struggled to maintain a smile that no longer convinced anyone. I didn't need to say anything. It wasn't necessary. Life itself was exposing everything they had wanted to ignore. Jennifer, unable to stay quiet, let out a fake laugh between her teeth. I suppose everyone has their little project in life. The phrase fell like a stone in a lake. Even the uncomfortable murmur died out. Alex arched an eyebrow, surprised, and slowly turned his head toward her. His smile became colder, sharper. Little project, he repeated, savoring each syllable. I don't know if I'd call a small project a company that, according to my colleagues, is closing a $1 million contract with one of the largest firms in the country. The blow was dry, definitive. I could have laughed at that moment. I could have risen triumphantly, pounding the table with my fists raised high. But I didn't. It wasn't necessary. Each of Alex's words was a hammer tearing down, one by one, the rotten foundations of a facade that for years my family had protected with such care. The desserts were left abandoned on the table. No one had an appetite. Some excused themselves to go to the bathroom. Others pretended to check their phones with sudden interest. Mom murmured something about bringing coffee, her voice barely audible. Dad stared fixedly at the candle in the center of the table, as if hypnotized by the small, wavering flame. Then Alex leaned toward me and whispered so softly that only I could hear him. You know, I've always wanted to work directly with you. Maybe we can talk about that soon. It took me a few seconds to take in what he was saying. Not only had I been publicly recognized, not only had I been vindicated in the eyes of those who had most belittled me, now, moreover, an even greater opportunity was opening up before me. And all this in front of those who for years had seen nothing but a hindrance in my existence. I nodded with serenity, like someone accepting any offer. But inside me, my heart was beating with savage force. Sure, I replied, my voice so calm it seemed we were talking about the weather. I'm available after the weekend. And it was at that precise moment that I felt everything change. Power, that invisible force that for so long had been concentrated in their hands, was now sliding toward me. Not because I claimed it, not because I demanded it, simply because I had grown too much to continue being ignored. When dinner ended, I was one of the first to get up. I didn't wait for the fake hugs or forced goodbyes. I put on my coat, firmly shook Alex's hand, and went out into the cold night. The freezing air hit me in the face like an invigorating slap. It didn't hurt. On the contrary, I felt more alive than ever. I walked to my car. Not the most luxurious on the street, but mine. A symbol of everything I had built my way. Imperfect, but authentic. I sat at the wheel, started the engine, and before leaving, I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, not for the humiliation I was leaving behind, but for the silent promise of the future I had begun to build. A future where I finally didn't need anyone's approval to feel enough. That night, as I drove back home, I understood something. The most powerful validation doesn't come from those who doubted you. It comes from yourself. From not having given up when everything seemed against you. From having continued building brick by brick even when no one was applauding. And deep in my soul, I knew that night was just the beginning. The days that followed that dinner were silent. Uncomfortable. The entire family seemed to have signed an unspoken pact. Pretend nothing had happened. As if Alex's toast could be swept under a rug made of trivial conversations and forced smiles. But something fundamental had changed. I felt it in every brief call, in every text message full of polite but empty phrases, in every averted gaze during family encounters. I was invisible, but also not accepted. I was uncomfortable. A living reminder of everything they had not wanted to see. And to my surprise, it didn't hurt me. not in the way it once hurt me. It was more like a slow release, like taking off a heavy coat after walking under the sun. I had regained something I didn't even know I had lost, my dignity. But I also understood something else. A deeper part of me, more wounded, was still wondering why it had to go this far for me to be seen. Was it not enough to have worked hard, to have dreamed big, to have persevered in silence? The following Monday, as I walked to my office, a sense of belonging enveloped me. There, among my team, among those who had accompanied me on long nights and uncertain beginnings, I was already valued. They didn't need a grandiose toast to see it. They knew it in the way they greeted me, in their genuine respect, in their silent trust. While reviewing contracts and answering emails, my cell phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from Jennifer. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to ignore it, move on, leave the past where it belonged. But another part, more curious and perhaps more compassionate, felt the need to know what she was seeking. I agreed to see her. We arranged to meet at a downtown cafe, neutral ground where emotions couldn't easily overflow. I arrived early and sat in a corner watching people pass by. I thought about how much my life had changed, how some wounds, despite everything, were still there, barely covered by a thin layer of success. Jennifer arrived late, as always, but something about her was different. She didn't come wrapped in her usual aura of perfection. No designer clothes, no flawless makeup, none of the arrogance that usually accompanied her. She seemed smaller, more real. She sat across from me, ordered a coffee, and for several minutes just played with the spoon, avoiding my gaze. Finally, she raised her head. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for how we treated you." I didn't know what to respond immediately. The apology, though welcome, sounded rehearsed, more like a need to clean her own guilt than to acknowledge the real damage. I stared at her. "Do you really want to apologize, or do you just want to feel better about yourself?" I asked calmly, without rancor, but with a new firmness. Jennifer opened her eyes wide, surprised by my tone. For the first time, I wasn't the younger brother seeking her approval. I was a man who knew who he was and what he was worth. "I guess both," she admitted, dropping her shoulders with a tired sigh. "I never thought that—" She stopped, searching for words. "Never thought I would achieve anything?" I completed. Without softening it, she lowered her head. There was no need for her to say it. Her silence was a confession. And then I saw something in her that I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. A glimpse of the girl who had also been molded by the blows of others' expectations. Jennifer wasn't just the golden daughter, the favorite. She was also a victim of that relentless family mold. The one that allowed no mistakes, that demanded brilliant successes that could be flaunted to others. "You were always brilliant," she whispered. But Dad, Mom, everyone expected something else. A pompous title, a suit and tie job, something they could show off at family gatherings. I leaned back in my chair and let her words float in the air. It wasn't personal. It never had been entirely. It was fear, insecurity, a desperate need to validate themselves through us. I smiled slightly, not in mockery but in understanding. "I didn't build my life to impress them," I said. "I built it because I believed in myself, even when no one else did." Jennifer nodded. And for a moment, all the pride, all the rivalry, all the absurd competition evaporated. We were just two siblings, two survivors of the same invisible chains. We said goodbye with an awkward handshake. A small gesture, but full of meaning. It didn't solve everything. It didn't erase years of distance or wounds. But it was a beginning. That night, as I drove back home, I understood something even deeper. The real triumph isn't that they finally recognize you. It's being able to see those who hurt you for what they are. Broken human beings trapped in their own limitations. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their conditional love. I had already won the most important battle, not betraying myself. And in the silence of my car, as the city blinked around me, I smiled because I knew my story was just beginning. Life has a curious way of settling scores, not always when one wants or how one expects. But sooner or later it does. During the months that followed, that truth was revealed in small details. My company continued to grow solidly. It wasn't an explosive rise like those that make headlines. It was steady, silent, and real. Each new client, each expansion, each signed contract was a silent testimony to the years of effort that no one had wanted to see. Sometimes, in the midst of work, I would find myself thinking of them, of Mom, of Dad, of Jennifer, of how they looked at me before and how they looked at me now. Did they really regret having belittled me, or did they just regret having lost control over my life? The difference was subtle, but it mattered. And although part of me wished all the resentment would disappear, another wiser part knew that there were wounds that might never fully heal. The relationship with my family became tense and superficial, without open fights, but also without real closeness. It was like attending a play where everyone knew their lines, but no one really believed in the story. Family gatherings, when they happened, were carefully measured. There were comments about the weather, empty questions about work, mechanical congratulations on achievements they neither understood nor tried to comprehend. Dad, who previously boasted proudly of other relatives' successes, now spoke of me in vague terms. He has his technology company, he would say, like someone mentioning something he doesn't fully understand. Mom had adopted another approach, active denial. Whenever someone mentioned my projects or achievements, she skillfully diverted the conversation to safer topics. Jennifer's vacations, some cousin's promotion, anything but talking about me. But it no longer hurt me. Far from it, it gave me an unexpected peace. I no longer needed their validation. I no longer sought their applause. My validation came from elsewhere. It came from clients who trusted me, from employees who built their future alongside me, from partners who bet on my ideas. And above all, it came from within, from knowing that I had endured, that I had persisted, that I had overcome. One spring afternoon, while reviewing contracts in the office, I received an unexpected call. It was Alex. His tone was relaxed, as always, but there was an underlying urgency in his voice. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. "I want to propose something to you." We agreed to meet that same week at his office. When I arrived, he greeted me with a broad smile, a cup of coffee in hand. The atmosphere was elegant. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, discreetly expensive artwork, all designed to impress. But those things no longer impressed me. I had learned that real value isn't measured in luxurious offices or high-end cars. It's measured in principles, in character, in the ability to build something authentic. We sat face to face, and without preamble, Alex presented his proposal. "I want you to consider a strategic alliance," he said. "My firm is interested in investing in your company, not to control it, not to change it, but to boost it." I remained silent, processing his words. It was a huge opportunity. Access to capital, contact networks, new markets. But it also meant opening doors, exposing oneself more. And I, after everything I had experienced, was cautious. "I appreciate the offer," I finally replied. "But before accepting, I need to know something." Alex raised an eyebrow, curious. "Why now?" His smile was honest, without a trace of mockery. "Because now I see what you've built," he said. "Because now I understand that it wasn't you who had to adapt to us. It was us who had to learn from you." His words touched something inside me. It wasn't an act of charity. It wasn't a handout. It was genuine respect. We spent hours discussing details, conditions, expectations, visions for the future. When I left that meeting, I carried a pre-agreement under my arm. A sense of achievement that didn't need applause to be valid. It was enough to know that once again, I had gotten there on my own merits. The following months were dizzying. The alliance with Alex allowed us to expand our operations to new cities. We hired more talent, launched new divisions. We positioned ourselves in sectors where before we were hardly known. Each small step was a silent victory over the ghosts of the past. And yet, I never forgot my roots. I never allowed success to blind me or make me arrogant. I remembered well the Sunday dinners, the averted glances, the hurtful words. Not to live trapped in resentment, but to never become what they had been to me. To always know what I was worth, even when no one else saw it. One autumn afternoon, as I was walking to my car after a meeting, I ran into Dad on the street. It was a casual, unexpected encounter. He saw me, hesitated for a second, and then approached. "I've heard good things about your company," he said, almost in a whisper. I looked at him for signs of sarcasm or condescension, but there were none. Just an awkward, uncomfortable honesty, like a man trying to mend something, but not knowing how. "Thanks," I replied simply, without rancor. There were no hugs, no tears. Just two men silently acknowledging the long roads each had traveled. Sometimes I thought as I walked away, forgiveness isn't given in words. It's given in continuing to walk, in continuing to build, in not allowing the past to define who you are. And I, now more than ever, knew exactly who I was. As I drove back home that afternoon, the city lights passed like blurry stains in front of the window, and I thought about all the versions of myself I had been: the promising son, the diligent student, the uncomfortable relative, the failed professional, the invisible entrepreneur. I realized something I had been feeling for a long time. I had always tried to fit into an image that wasn't mine, into an expectation that didn't belong to me. But now I knew, with a new certainty, that that image no longer defined who I was. That small recognition from Dad, though awkward and late, was like closing a chapter, not because I needed his approval, but because I understood that I no longer had to carry the need to be accepted by those who only knew how to value trophies and not trajectories. I was more than that. I always had been. They simply never knew how to see it. The following days were busy and exciting. New contracts, new alliances, new challenges. But in the midst of that whirlwind, one day I received a call I didn't expect. It was Mom. She almost never called me without reason, except for birthdays or emergencies. "Do you have a moment to stop by the house?" she asked. "I'd like to talk to you." There was something in her voice, a different softness, as if she were walking on unexplored terrain. I agreed, not out of necessity, but out of curiosity. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Mom greeted me in the living room with 2 cups of coffee on the center table. It was the same room where years ago they had ignored me. But that day the atmosphere was different. Dense, vulnerable, real. We sat down. Mom nervously wrung her hands, struggling to find the words. "I wanted to apologize," she said without preamble. "Not just for what happened at Thanksgiving, for everything." I remained silent. Not out of coldness, but because I didn't expect this openness. She took a deep breath and continued. "I thought we were doing the right thing. Pressing you, pushing you to follow the path everyone expected. I thought it was love, that it was protection. But I was wrong." Her words were awkward, painfully sincere. They weren't rehearsed apologies to save appearances. They were real, and that made them harder to process. "We were ashamed of you," she confessed in a whisper, like someone admitting an unforgivable sin. "Not because you weren't successful, but because your success didn't fit into the story we wanted to tell the world." It hurt to hear that, even though I already knew it or had felt it in every averted glance, in every uncomfortable conversation. Mom lowered her voice even more. "Now I see that you were always the bravest of us all." For an instant, I felt I could cry. Not from sadness, not from joy, but from pure relief. All that weight I had carried for so long, believing the problem was me, dissolved in that moment. And I understood something. It wasn't my job to fix their broken expectations. It wasn't my responsibility to fill the mold they had designed. My job was to continue being me, with all my imperfection, with all my light. "Thank you," I finally said. I didn't need more. I wasn't looking for more. We stayed talking a while longer, like 2 people rebuilding a long-fallen bridge. We didn't solve everything. We didn't heal all the wounds, but we laid the first stones on more honest ground. When I left the house, the sky was covered with clouds, but on the horizon there was a strange glow, like a silent promise that although the storm had been long, the sun always finds a way to return. That night, in my apartment, I looked at everything I had built. Not just a company, not just a success story. I had built an authentic, free life. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream forward. Not to prove anything, not to silence old voices, but simply because I deserved it. Because I always deserved it. And although I didn't know exactly what came next, I knew one thing with total certainty. I would face it standing, with my head held high. Because now I knew an unshakable truth. Who you are doesn't depend on who recognizes you. It depends on who you decide to be when no one sees you. And finally, I saw myself clearly. The months that followed that conversation with Mom were a mixture of calm and rebirth. Life finally gave me space to build without looking back, without seeking approval, without begging for recognition. Each new project, each client who trusted us, each employee who grew within the company was a reminder that the path I had chosen was real, solid, authentic. Jennifer was also changing, though. I saw her day by day leaving behind the need to be perfect, understanding that true greatness comes from humility and honest work. Her transformation was slow, sometimes painful, but genuine, and seeing her advance in her own process taught me something new about patience, about empathy. My family, for their part, had begun to build bridges. Small gestures, invitations to lunch, brief messages asking about my well-being. They weren't trying to fill the void of past years, but rather to build something different. Something based, this time, on respect. Not all broken ties healed, and I understood that was okay too. There are wounds that, although they scar over, leave marks. And those marks tell stories that deserve to be respected. One ordinary Saturday, while organizing papers in my office, I found an old notebook I used in the beginning. The pages were full of clumsy ideas, impossible budgets, dreams too big for someone who at that moment felt so small. Among all those notes, one phrase stood out, underlined several times. Someday they'll know who I am. I stared at those words for a long time. The young man who wrote them did so from pain, from the desperate hunger to be seen. I didn't judge him. I knew everything he had gone through. But I also understood something very profound. I no longer needed anyone to know who I was to feel complete. I closed the notebook. I kept it in a drawer, not as a sad memory, but as a silent monument to the journey. Life isn't about being seen. It's about seeing yourself, about recognizing yourself when the world decides to ignore you, about continuing to believe even when no one else does, about building even when no one applauds, about dreaming even when no one believes, about persisting even when everything seems against you. That afternoon, I left the office without a fixed destination. I breathed the fresh air of the city. I felt life beating beneath my feet. There was no final destination. There was no goal I needed to reach to feel successful. The real victory was this: being able to look back without regrets, look at the present with gratitude, and look to the future with hope. Because in the end, that's what matters most.